Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Harry, and I'm with Bluestream Content Solutions, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited to have you here for an automating content production with Agentic AI. It's part of Bluestream's webinar series exploring the future of structured content, documentation, and intelligent content operations. We're pleased to be joined today by Michael Iantosca, Senior Director of Knowledge Platforms and Engineering at Avalara, in conversation with Rahel Bailie of Content Seriously. Together, they'll share practical insights into how advanced AI-driven documentation workflows are being developed and applied. So before we begin, thank you very much for being here. We do hope today that you leave with some useful ideas, practical considerations, and a clear sense of what Agentic AI can be possible for your content production. And so with that, I'd like to introduce over both of our speakers today. So I'll just add in Michael, and I'll add in Rahel. And yeah, I'll pass over to Rahel from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, hi, Michael. I'm so glad to be talking with you. I'm just going to set the scene before we jump into it, because I know there's so many questions that I have for you, and we have a lot to cover in this hour. So tech doc teams are always being streamlined, you know, that they're first to get cut when there are cuts. And so we're expected to do more with less. And so we're expected to work smarter and not harder. And but we know we can't cut quality because tech docs has to be trusted information. And so now we can use AI to automate without having a drop in quality if we do it carefully. And Avalara seems to have cracked the code, so to speak, in balancing efficiency with accuracy. So my first question to you is, in the context of documentation production, what makes AI agentic?
Thank you. I appreciate you having me today, and welcome everybody. I hope this is informative and useful. Before I answer that question, I just want to make one sort of disclaimer. I am a practitioner. I have nothing to sell anybody here, which is different from a lot of webinars, right? We're going to have a discussion today, not to show off what we have, you know, look what we have, but to show and explain what's evolving in the most advanced shops in documentation and what your organizations can have. The reason why is because we want you to become an agent of change. In fact, there's a really good webinar coming up on that very subject that I saw. What we want you to do as the outcome of this webinar is we want you to explain to your leadership what they could have. And we want you to lead the effort because if you don't, developers are going to lead it who don't understand this space. And they're going to define it, and they're going to define you. And this is your opportunity to lead and transform your roles into something new that not just we're reducing technical writers. So I just want to just sort of kick off that little framing, if you will, myself. But the difference between AI alone, and agentic AI is truly epochal. I mean, it's when people understand what we're doing and what you can do yourselves, I think it's really going to be. I know it's an old frame, but it's a paradigm change. Today, writers and shops are being asked to use AI. Right? It's like, what the hell does that mean? Right? Excuse the French. I'm from New Jersey. You know, so what they do is they start using large language models directly. You start prompting them. We had a whole window of people thinking we're going to all become prompt engineers. And that's going to be a whole new career path. And that's just, you know, it's just using manual shovels to try to, you know, build the World Trade. You know, it really is. But that was the first generation, right? And then we started building workflows. One of the first workflows we built was taking completed support cases we use Salesforce. So we took the Salesforce completed use cases, which had a massive corpus of knowledge that was collected during the process of receiving and solving that use case, and automatically building KCS support articles. But it was not agentic, right? But it was tremendously useful because we were using AI, we were calling AI, and we were having AI synthesize all that input. And it was deflecting cases, like especially the high repetitive ones where, hey, how do I change my password? Well, gee, we can serve up instantly, the process for changing your password or resetting it or whatever. And so we cut a huge number of use cases, but that was not agentic. What makes something agentic, first of all, is an orchestrated workflow, or independent agents that work in concert with each other, that each have roles, they each have skills. There's many agents. It's not just an agent. An agentic content supply chain has many agents that work across the entire workflow from the inception to delivery of the content. Each agent or an agent has skills. Those skills are defined and managed by the people that understand what those skills should be. And guess who has the best knowledge of what those skills are, right? It's the professional documentation people, not the engineers, right?
Right.
And then, agents have memory, right? Whereas when you put things straight into a large language model, there's no memory model there to understand, what has already occurred in a transaction. You think it does, but it really doesn't. And it has true orchestration. There are two ways to approach it. I've seen both. One where you have autonomous agents that just listen and wait to do something, and then sequential agents that we can show you. So when we talk a little bit more, I'd like to actually show a real agentic workflow for creating new documentation from brand new products, entire user guides, and also new feature documentation. So let's move on.
We have some time to cover that. So tell me very briefly, what was like the ultimate goal that you're aiming for, and how close did you get to your goal? Just like a high level, and we can get into the details after that.
Yeah, this was not driven by like a desire to shed writers, right? The motivation was the software development lifecycle, especially, is becoming agentified. There's swarms of agents that are now scanning thousands of Jira tickets for fixes, changes, updates, even new features. And these agents are interpreting the Jira tickets. It's literally making the changes to the code and then offering to check that code into Git repositories, with the developers having, the ability to then review and commit. So we're moving toward a 10x SDLC process. I'm not kidding you, right? This is really happening. This is beyond code generators like Cursor and Q. This is beyond that generation. What happens is the volume of documentation that's going to be required because of the acceleration of product will overwhelm even, the average shop. Even if you hire writers, is not going to be able to keep up with the volume of documentation that is stemming from this acceleration. So we have to do that. The other aspect of it was we're agentifying the whole process, not just the documentation, but everything from the very beginning of the development of a product with the PRFAQ, for example. And it's moving toward a doc first waterfall kind of model, shockingly, instead of this agile, sort of model that's been around. And the documentation needs to be there quickly. So when my leadership came to me and they said, hey, we want to speed this up, we need much more higher speed and higher velocity. They were saying, we want turnaround of documentation in 24 hours,
Wow.
ready to publish, right? Because those SDLC processes are now operating on 30 and 60-day models. So this is not about, hey, let's just, save resources. This is about how do you actually keep up? And what's going to happen is we're going to have a K-shaped kind of model here where some shops have these agentic workflows and can keep up, and the shops that don't may have to hire a whole lot more writers.
Wow. Had not thought of that aspect of it, but that's going to be encouraging to all the tech doc people who are on the line or in our audience right now. But okay, I'm going to go into that later. But before we really kind of dive into the details of how you were reaching these goals, yeah, I think there are a couple of concepts that we need to understand. And so one is like the difference between probabilistic and deterministic models and why we need to understand the difference before you kind of dive into this.
Yeah, that's great. You know, people were very excited when generative AI hit. I started with AI back in 1991. It was called Expert Systems, and then Watson for many years. Those were deterministic systems. There were literally learning systems, machine learning in the Watson era, that were based on things like ontologies and models that had provenance. You knew where the answers were coming from, right?
Okay.
When generative AI hit, it was probabilistic, right? And I think everybody understands that generative AI is a probabilistic kind of model. It's looking for the closest elements and vectors, and it does a very, very good job at it. So everybody popped the champagne corks real fast after we were developing articles for support to divert support cases, because it was okay that our chatbots, for example, it got it right 50, 60, 70, even 80% of the time. But now that we're in the agentic world, right, and you have many agents that have to make correct decisions, you can't afford that 20% maybe it's wrong. Because
yeah.
it's down, almost cascading down the entire chain. So when you see the studies from MIT, for example, that only 95% of AI projects are failing, and only 5% is succeeding. And I even wonder about those 5% sometimes, because I wonder if they're just workflows and not really agentic, sort of workflows. The reason is that probabilistic gap. Right? It's what I call, and I've said this before many times in my papers, is it's called the precision paradox. Once you get beyond that 80%, that last 20% is the hardest part to deal with.
Right.
And the tolerance for that 20% being wrong sinks the closer you get to that 85, 90, 95%. So you need to, it's not that the large language model is bad. It's great at what it does. It just can't do it alone. You have to pre-process content to give it only what it needs and what it should have, and not overload it with too much context that it should not deal with. And then you need validations both on the front end and the back end that are going to make sure that what is coming in is actually high quality input, right? Not garbage in, and what's coming out is valid and accurate and tested. And that requires a lot as well.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So can you walk us through kind of how you got from the starting point to wherever you are now? Like, what are the major phases of how you prepared your repository, and then what you did with that repository once it was in good enough shape and so on?
Yeah, it is a fascinating area where I think content management systems now are one of the most important elements, because you really need control over the operations of your content.
So when you say content management systems, you're talking about like at the authoring end, like authoring systems, or are you talking at the delivery end, delivery systems?
I'm talking about their role in the entire agentic workflow, right?
Oh, okay.
Because they represent the source of truth and the semantic intelligence that we need. So with just generating new content alone, we need better input, right? So think about how technical writers have evolved, right? I started as a technical writer in 1981. At the time, we were receiving 1,000-page specifications for operating system, releases. We still had to go interview every single developer who owned a module and ask a million questions in order to be able to write accurate and quality, world-class documentation, because that's the way it was. Then we went to Agile, and suddenly we got nothing. and technical writers became sleuths, right? We became investigative journalists, and it
Mhm.
was go figure it out on your own. We just wrote the code. And if you want to read our code, that's good. They trained me as a dual writer programmer, so I could read assembly language and sit down with them and point out their bugs, which blew them away very often because technical writers, what do they know, right?
Right.
But still, here's the interesting difference I think that I'm facing with these agentic workflows. My leadership said, we're going to move the responsibility for providing the knowledge collateral left. We're going to move it up the chain. We're going to make the program managers, right, the product managers and the SMEs responsible for providing that core knowledge, right, however good or bad it is, right, as the input before the agentic processes even start. So right there was a leadership decision, right, that we're no longer going to let them get away with not providing the knowledge collateral. And so we're going to put them in charge of the agentic workflow.
But
And
now
the role
we
of the is
we
going to
know
change.
that they don't write very well. Like they, because they're not professional writers, they're professional coders. And so how did you get that quality of what they provided good enough to be able to extract the next?
Yeah. So that's called criteria. And,
so it's governance, kind of. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So we know what that criteria is, right? As professional technical writers.
Right.
If you go look at, I don't know, ADITA or any other well-documented set of questions that you need to ask to write a world-class task document, there's probably about, I have at least 30 or 40 questions that you ask immediately. You want to know who's the audience, what's their skill level, what's the goal of the task, what's the outcome, what are the exceptions. There's a whole litany of questions that need to be answered. So you can build agents to go look at the collateral and say, does it provide that knowledge in what's provided? And it's not just one kind of collateral. We found, for example, that some of the best collateral, if we hold the providers to the standard, is recording video, Zoom videos of using the product for real in real time and explaining and including all of that information. So we have an agent that will parse through the videos and actually extract the text and extract the screen captures and look at it. Now, if we feel that the quality or the sufficiency of the input, and that's not just the video, now we're talking about the original PRFAQ, we're talking about what we call reuse vercel, so V0, the code, the UI prototypes. We're talking about the Figma collateral. We're talking about any other written documentation. We're talking about the code too, even though we only get a small amount of value out of the code. Very good for API doc, but not a whole lot more. And video demos. So we have agents, separate agents that can parse through every one of those kinds of pieces of collateral, right? And that'll expand over time to be much more. And then what we end up with is a pretty darn good draft. That's about 80% there, right? So now we've taken that 80%. Now you can debate whether or not you want a professional technical writer to take that 80% and bring it to 100 in the middle of that workflow because they're still human in the loop, right? Or do you want to give that job to the engineers and make them suffer their own, their own bad input before maybe at the very end, and have the professional technical writers do QA at the end? The other part of that process is I love Manny Silva's book, Docs as Code. He's got a new one coming out for AI. I'd love to plug it. I wrote the preface for it. We can even ultimately identify docs as tests, because we can take that and say, hey, let's build automatic generators that will test the actual product against what the final documentation is. So these are agents we still have yet to build some of these agents, but we have all the core agents to create net new documentation. The one we're doing right now, literally by the hour, I was blown away by what I saw. was updating existing documentation, going through thousands or hundreds of thousands of topics and determining where we need to make specific updates when a product changes. That's a mind-boggling complex endeavor. But I'm watching it, and I'm watching it work, and I'm stunned that we can even make that work at this point. So yeah, there's a whole lot here, and I would love people to see even a foundational demo of a real agentic workflow in action. I think we have one, and I would love to use that time and show people. It's a 2-minute demo.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to show you how we're using AI to automatically generate product documentation for net new features, reducing manual effort, speeding delivery, and improving consistency using our Avalara system. It all starts with our Jira documentation request tickets, which will include new attachments for documentation generation, such as peer FAQs, video demos, Figma designs, V0 prototypes, and code repositories. We're going to start the workflow off in the Avalara app, with options to trigger the workflow from Jira or Slack currently being built. There are several options for how the documentation can be generated based on the needs of the ticket. The workflow has 5 different agents that it goes through: a payload ingestion agent, a content generation agent, a content QA agent, classification agent, and a publication agent. Going into the detailed view, we can now watch as the orchestrator goes through each step of the workflow, activating each agent as it goes. It's going to start first with the payload ingestion agent, which will go through the Jira ticket, grab all the attached inputs, and process them for the content generation agent to use. The content generation agent will then create a table of contents and generate the content for each topic. Content generation is now complete, creating drafts that are not a rough starting point, but are ready for review and refinement, organized for both human readability and downstream systems like search and AI. A PM or writer can now come in and review the content, ensuring technical accuracy and content quality. Once the content has been approved, they mark it ready for publication, which triggers the classification agent. The classification agent will analyze the content and apply the appropriate taxonomy tags, which will improve search for customers, as well as the accuracy of AI tools like Abby that ingest the content. The publication agent then takes over, converting the content to data XML, sending it to Ixiasoft or CCMS, and publishing it directly to our internal knowledge center for final review before going out to our customers. The workflow is now complete. We can see the content live in our internal knowledge center and are ready to publish it live for customers. During testing, this end-to-end process took less than 15 minutes with some light editing of the content needed. So instead of starting from a blank page, we're reviewing and refining based on feedback, dramatically reducing time to delivery. We're turning documentation into a real-time capability that scales with the business. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, and that's just a simple workflow of only a handful of agents. I think we've laid out something like 25 plus agents that we still
Wow.
need. We have, think about automatic trademarking. Think about automatic accessibility conformance to WCAG standards. I talked about the DOCSIS tests, right? There's so much more that we have yet to build out for both net new and net update workflows. But what's fascinating here is, and I want to share this with my peer writers, if we just let the developers do this without us, they're going to think it's really simple, and they're going to cut corners, and you're going to get very, very basic, just a couple of steps for how to do something and none of the context and other information that needs to be there. I managed, I have both an engineering team, dedicated engineers, and this is what you all need to ask for, is some dedicated engineers, because you're not going to get this from the vendors, by the way. Nobody can put together an end-to-end workflow at this point. Each component is a piece of it, right? So you're going to get some help within their individual components. That you're going to get some agentic AI, you're inside of each one of those. But to put it all together as an end-to-end, my engineering team daily works hand in hand with the professional documentation experts, okay? There were no longer two separate teams. We're literally in the same room or virtual room every single day, because my engineers, they're really good at building something, but they don't understand and have the depth of knowledge of what world-class documentation and processes are, for example.
I think what you said, what you're saying there is so profound, Michael, because for so long there have been these silos, and we've always said, hey, why doesn't anyone talk to the content people? And they're trying to kind of read everyone's mind and doing the best they can, but they aren't mind readers, so they don't know. And the content people aren't good at explaining kind of how important some of these things are. And so you've had these like two parallel tracks, and they don't always, like, the train can't run on them because they're going in all different directions. And so this is bringing it into this kind of like cross profession or cross discipline collaboration is what can make the magic happen. And I think that's such an important point.
That's why we used to be called, I don't know, information developers, years back, and then experienced people, and then we moved on to different titles. I like to think of all of the professional documentation people today in this world as knowledge experience engineers, because they are needing to pick up these new roles and these new skills. For example, when we're using taxonomies and ontologies and knowledge graphs, that's not an engineering responsibility. That's a knowledge management responsibility. That belongs in the hands of the technical documentation professionals. Okay, the skills. When we talk about agent skills, you can embed certain skills that are never changing in the program logic, but there's a lot of those agent skills that are variable and different for different contexts. So we externalized all of those prompts and skills in a separate system, what's called an MCP hub, so that the technical documentation professionals have total control over the templates and the skills of the agents. So you can see very quickly what's happening is the technical documentation professional roles move toward an operational governance responsibility and a QA responsibility and a design responsibility for these agentic systems. So there's a whole new set of roles and careers opening up. And I talk about them at length in my paper on my website, thinkingdocumentation.com, in one of my latest papers about all these new roles that are just emerging. And they didn't come out of like a guess. That's literally what's happening in my own environment, that we're still need certain amount of technical writers to handle all the edge cases and exceptions, because we can't handle everything, every single use case. So there's still a need for that. Maybe someday, and when I'm long gone and buried, we'll figure out how to do some of those edge cases. But there's much more opportunity. And once your senior leaders see that you understand what the business can have and what the value is to the business, they're going to treat you as the expert, not the developers, because the developers can't even articulate the value prop. And so when they say we want best-in-class documentation, you've got to be able to challenge them and say, well, what is the threshold for best-in-class documentation? If I go through all of those things that are necessary to be included in a good quality task document, or minimalism, and other, progressive disclosure and all of those things, developers wouldn't know the first thing about those kinds of things. I tell people, go back and read the old Bibles. Like, go buy it. I literally give the engineers, I say, go get a copy of Developing Quality Technical Information that the IBM editors wrote years and years ago. It's timeless. It tells you exactly what quality content is and exactly how to measure it, right? And it's no different today than it was then. And we need to educate them that no, just because you watch TV commercials does not make you a TV commercial producer.
Exactly.
Even if you slept at a Holiday Inn last night, so therein lies the danger, because what's going to end up happening is they will create technical debt that is so huge that when it's late. Right.
So recently I was at a conference for conversation designers, conversational AI conference, and they talk every speaker on day one mentioned content debt, and it wasn't a coordinated thing, and they all had it baked into their decks that they had prepared beforehand. And they were all worried about that because no one's ever really invested in the content at the beginning. So now you have all of this that, they're trying to get the chatbots to work well, right, at the delivery end. And if you're a bank, if you're a financial institution, if you're an insurance company, if you're medical, if you're in life sciences, you can't afford to have that, like you said, 80% is good enough. Like, it has to be really, really good. So how do you reduce the content debt? And now I've heard there's a woman from the Netherlands called, her name is Micah, and she came from technical writing, went into conversation design, and she said she's no longer designing conversations. Now she's more like a LLM ops analyst. And that's kind of what she does. And so the same way, technical writing, which I think was an anomaly anyways, because writing was only 15% of what you did, and the other was, research and sleuthing and stakeholder management and research and all that. And so, moving tech writers from that state to knowledge, you call them knowledge experience engineers. And I think that is, like you've hit the nail on the head with that one, is that's what they're doing, is they're engineering these systems now. And we just had a question about what can tech writers do to become technical enough to create these agentic AI workflows.
That's great. So you don't need to learn how to code. That's not what we want technical documentation professionals to do, right? No, really, we don't. I mean, I have phenomenal engineers. I only have, a handful, but they're great. And they can implement what you want, what you can design. And so we want you to be the designer. We want you to be the governance of what is designed, the actual creator. You know what the process is. And I think this is the craziness. I was just talking to one of my developers, I'm very much a mentoring kind of manager. And I said, what's the first thing you do? I used to go to IBM technical writing school. We actually had an entire university, right? At one point back in the good old days, right? And when you go to technical writing class 101, what is the very first thing they cover? The very first subject, right? Know your audience. Right? Okay. And what's the next thing? You cannot not communicate, right? There's these fundamental things that we all forgot. Why? Because we have ingrained in our beings as professional technical documentation people, right?
But there's also this other thing that, I call it the Black Velvet Elvis syndrome, which is that I think it was Liberace who had hanging a big picture of a black, Elvis painted on black velvet, and obviously very tacky, and would hang it next to a Monet, and he would say, they're both art. And so you get that thing where, the product manager looks at something, some AI slop that got generated, went, good enough, check documentation. Yeah. And now it's coming back to bite us because it's always cut. And invest in the marketing department, ignore the technical documentation. And now it's coming back to say, you racked up so much content debt, you now need to remediate it. And nobody knows how, except technical writers.
So look at it from my perspective. I'm a senior director, which means I report to a senior vice president. Not to impress you, but what I'm trying to say is I see the numbers, right? I'm literally in those leadership meetings where we're talking about things like ARR. This is like new customer acquisition, customer loss of, retention numbers, right? We're looking at customer satisfaction, right? Or here we call it CPO, customer pissed off score, right? All these different numbers that are tracked at the very, very top of the business by the leadership, top leadership and the board. If you've got 30 seconds in an elevator with a CEO, I love asking this question. What would you ask? And I already know, or what would you say to the CEO? And I would say, do you want your customer retention, new customer and satisfaction to go up or go down? And I say, what communicates to your customer every single day the most other than the actual product interface? And why would you then not invest more in that? I mean, that's my 30-minute elevator pitch to a CEO.
30 seconds.
A 30-second elevator pitch to a CEO to make him start thinking, you know something? That might be one of the most important things that we should be investing in and expanding on, not reducing, because what he cares about or what she cares about are those numbers. And unfortunately, we don't make the connection between what we're doing and what's happening in the boardroom and in the top of the business.
Well, that
And
was
that's
going to be my next question, was like, how does this automation factor translate into business benefits? Is it like cost, time, trust? What about the benefit to end users? And, you know, I think with content, it's always been, hey, we all learn to write in grammar school, so we're all writers, or we're all content people. And I always say, you know, I counter kind of like you did with the advertising. Watching ads doesn't make you an ad producer, but, you know, I learned to ride a bicycle, but I will never be able to you know, compete in the Tour de France, never mind win the Tour de France. And when you think about like that, winning the Tour de France is like what makes your company succeed is that you're better than your competitors. And so you've got to win that Tour de France, and you're not going to do it by giving someone a broken down bicycle and saying like, here, go right up the hill, you know?
That's absolutely true.
So talk to me a little bit more about like the, not just the business benefit, but the operational benefit.
Expand on that question a little more.
So like, you know, if maybe you're cutting your drafts from, you know, this many weeks to that many weeks, you're making things easier for the people who actually do the work to do the doing.
That's right. Yeah. So there's tremendous amount of grunt work that we all do, right? You know, yes. That, like I said, sifting through input, right? That's like the biggest one, right? That chews us up, trying to go get that knowledge capital that, you know, because the process of learning, which is what we do, right, as professionals, is, you know, we associate, we assimilate, and we communicate, right? That's our basic process. So, you know, I love this upstream. We're going to push the responsibilities and the accountability upstream, because no longer can they get away with it. And guess what? If they approve something to be published, you know, and it gets out there and it's bad, guess who we come back to and blame? And it's not going to be the technical documentation professionals, because our process is good, and we can measure and show that we had, you know, terrible low scores, inadequate input, inadequate review, or whatever it happens to be. We reduced the generation of the first drafts from 2 weeks to 30 minutes or less.
Wow.
That is a measure that knocks the socks off of senior leaders, because then they're saying, wow, you know, we really can accelerate the speed and, you know, and the velocity of what we're doing. It's not enough just to look at it like documentation. You got to make yourself part of the bigger process. When I talk about documentation, I don't just think about documentation. I think about the entire SDLC, this entire software development lifecycle workflow, which includes everything from this is now, you know, write the press release first, all the way through delivery and support and enablement for partners and developers. So if you think about where you are in that bigger supply chain and your role, you can now start to explain to your leadership why you need to accelerate and be accurate and have that provenance to prove, yes, this has been, you know, this is world class. This is best in class content. That's going to take a lot of work, a lot of development to do, and the people that know what that quality is and what the criterias are that need to be baked into all of this. And it's not static. Once you build it, it's not something that, oh, it's built and it's done. No, these people who are moving from your traditional technical writer role into this knowledge engineering, you know, designer role, or taxonomy management, or knowledge graph management. So people need to read and start studying through GPT, right, through large language models, some of these areas. I just published a paper, I think it was yesterday morning, my first one in a while. I think it's like 10 pages long, but it talks about what is a deterministic agentic system and how do you get there. And it talks about things like, you know, IIRDS, an upcoming standard, ontologies, knowledge graphs, context graphs. If you're not asking GPT what these things are and what they mean to documentation, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not becoming fluent in the understanding. It's not that you need to build them yourself, but you need to understand conceptually what they are so that you can say, hey, I need you to build me a knowledge graph of our content. And oh, by the way, oh yeah, you need to understand, what our constraints are and what the relationships are between things. Great. Your role as a documentation professional is to be the brains and let the engineers build
Right.
and do it together as a team. And that's where I see the roles going. Not do I see technical writer jobs disappearing? Yeah, pure ones I do, because I don't think that you can be a pure technical writer anymore and not contribute toward these next generation agentic. The whole notion of just using a large language model, just feeding something to GPT manually or a trained, GPT model and prompting, that is going to disappear faster than you can imagine. And it's going to be, were you part of designing and developing in concert with your development engineers and with your vendors?
So I think of this, what I'm hearing you say is that we're almost like business analysts in the sense that we translate between user needs and what the engineers need to build. So between business and technical. So we have to be able to parse, we have to be able to absorb what is needed. We need to be able to translate that into what the agents look like and then get someone to code it.
And then govern it.
And then govern it. Oh, yes. Everything, in case it's not clear to some people in the audience, it's like I'm hearing governance throughout this whole thing, because who's going to hold feet to the fire to say you have to provide, your engineers, you have to provide this information to the people who are, parsing it downstream. You need to have that review cycle. You need to have people committed to review. You can't have the tech writer. Somebody said to me, I literally chase people around the desk and corner them in their cubicles to get them to review something. Can't be doing that, right? That they have to be responsible and so on and so forth. So, and that's just part of, the one thing where I disagree with you is I never use the term supply chain. Because supply chain to me is you create a book, a physical book, and you sell it to someone and you never see that again. You never update that book. You can make updates to it, but that's a new book that they buy and you never see it once it's sold. Whereas the life cycle, and you talked about this, like the complete development life cycle, the life cycle takes into account that nothing's ever done. Right? You have to decide whether it gets iterated or it gets sunset, and you do that over and over again, kind of like a slinky. It builds up around and around and around. So
you're correct. Mine's probably aging out at this point. My use of supply chain, because really, if you think about it, if you did say Doxis tests correctly, even agentically, to automate it, right? Now you have a system of record of what is currently operationally the truth, which can be input back into the software development front-end process, which nobody is even really thinking about in any really serious way. So if we had validated, accurate, that's the current system of record, right? The other thing is people start need to thinking about is agentifying operations. Operations become far more important in this world than they ever were. I mean, we've always given operations a short shrift, right? I mean, gosh, I used to go in front of a gigantic audience at CITM or wherever at Convex and say, hey, raise your hands. How many of you actually have an inventory, a digital inventory of all of your content beyond a spreadsheet? And I'd get 2 hands raised in the audience. I was horrified. I said, let alone that was just their product documentation, not all of the user-facing documentation. Now we need to be thinking, when you saw that demo, you saw a list of jobs, right? That was based on complete inventory of every single publication that we have and all the metadata about every single publication. That's been automated. And operations are going to be agentified too. So it's not just the production of content, it's also operations management gets into the game now in this agentic world. I don't want to leave that out.
No, I can see that happening. Now we're coming up to very quickly into Q&A. So I'm going to just ask two questions, and I want them to be quick answers so that we can go to some of the questions that people have asked. But how important is it to have semantically structured content? Like, we all come from a DITA standards world. We have CCMSs. You know, this is sponsored by Bluestream that has a CCMS. How important is that? Because we're now hearing like, oh, there's Markdown and there's HTML, and Markdown is dead and HTML is the new Markdown. And like,
Yeah.
So,
so
that's one question I have. So quick answer.
Quick answer is you want the most semantically rich, self-explaining content source that you could possibly feed to a machine. And telling it what it formats like is not the same as what it is. And
exactly.
This is where all of those formats, this is where they said, oh, a couple of years ago, right, 6, 7, 8 years ago, DITA's getting long in the tooth. Now it's the heart of what you need. And it's not because the large language model consumes it. It's the pre-processing with knowledge graphs where it's valuable. This whole notion of feeding structured content and markup to a large language model, forget about it. That's not where it's used. And people have to disabuse themselves of that thought, right? You need to use it to build these intelligent, deterministic knowledge graphs. And my new paper on my website goes deep into that.
Okay. And then if, you know, this is kind of like the final question that I have before we take audience questions, is what would be the top piece of advice you'd give to others who want to take on a similar project in their organization?
Go to your leaders and say, look at what Amazon's doing over there with the automation of their documentation. Look at what Manny Silva's doing. Look what Michael's doing over here. We are falling so far behind. We need the engineering resources, and we need to be in control of directing them to build this, and you will become the experts. You'll save your jobs, actually, because your jobs will transform, and the business will benefit from doing it properly before they hit that wall of debt that they're going to inevitably hit because, oh yeah, they watched a commercial, you know, and they think they could actually produce a Hollywood, you know, version tomorrow.
Yes, we can do a music video. Thank you.
Let's take questions.
Okay, so we had the first question that we had, I think we kind of answered as we went, which is, you know, how do we become technical enough to create these workflows? So follow on to that, it was about the demo. The demo seems to convey a very developer-driven process with tech writers as the human in the loops for simple copy editing. I don't think this perception aligns with what you're advocating. So how do you see the role of tech writers shifting, and how can we convince our leadership that we need to engage with developers? I think we've kind of answered a lot of that, but is there anything else that you want to say about that before I go on to some of the other questions?
I think the jury's still out a little bit. I've got my popcorn ready. As we're deploying these agentic systems and making the developers responsible for being the primary operators, with the technical professionals picking up the complex backend and exception cases and governance and all of that. Developers are very highly paid people, even more so usually than technical writers. They like to code and they don't like to produce collateral. It's fascinating when you get a leadership that says, no, they're going to do that. That kind of support is incredible. It's where it belongs, by the way, because for too long they got away without providing any knowledge collateral, and you know, so it's just and even when they do, there's still going to be more information. There's still going to be exceptions. There's still going to be use cases that are not covered. This is where the technical doc professionals really come into the equation, because they're still going to be needed. I'm convinced of that. But with the volumes that are going to increase, there's no way they're going to be handle it without that kind of front-end automation. So I think a combination now could be that certain doc shops say, no, we will require the input from the knowledgeable creators of this thing from all those different sources I talked about, but we're going to put the doc professionals in charge of the post-generation editing and curation and QA. That's fine. I prefer a collaboration kind of model of those two, but I think I got my popcorn out because I think there's going to be quite a reaction from the SMEs, which have been able to get away with a lot of this responsibility and accountability for a long time. And I think it's going to be a fascinating result to see how is that going to match up to the dictate coming from top down that says, no, you will do it that way.
So another question that came in is, isn't the basis of agents prompts?
Prompt. Okay, so an agent's skills can be declared a couple of different ways, right? The two most prominent ways would be we can embed those skills in the compiled program logic. So anything that's not going to be volatile can be put into the program logic, right into your source code. But there's many skills that are prompts, but it's not just prompts. You got templates that these agents use, and other kinds of content that will go into the skills and the infrastructure behind it. And it won't be isolated either. I mean, we've actually put our stuff in a whole MCP. It's called, I don't want to go into MCP now, but a whole MCP model protocol management structure. So we could have the technical writers not only create the original prompts, but let's say you get a brand new document type that you've never had to deal with before. Well, you're going to have to develop the agent skill to handle that particular document type because it's unique. It's different than all the other document types that you've dealt with in the past. And guess what? Those are going to change over time. So we built an entire management structure to manage those, to allow the professional documentation people to directly own and manage all those skills and templates and things that have to be done. In addition to all the governance of the linting tools like, Acrolinks, or other similar kind of linters that govern all of the editorial quality guidelines. I think we're using the successor today to that to Acrolinks. We're using Markup AI, which allows us to do lights out optimization too. So a combination of both lights out and human optimization turns out to be a wonderful combination of the two. We can sort of get people 80% of the way there and let them handle the last 20%.
There was another question that was a follow-on that was about how internal AI agent usage at Cloudflare grew 600% in 3 months, and Cloudflare just kind of wanted to reduce headcount. So it says, will we need to upskill, for example, writing the AI agent skills and templates, then govern all of it? I think we've answered that. So yeah, okay. I'm going to move on to the next.
Who's better at it than the people watching this webinar? You are the skills. Here's the problem, right, Ray? We may document the big rocks of our process, but professional technical documentation people know hundreds of things in their brains that have never been written down that they do every single day, just out of rote of their professional skills. And one of their skills has to be doing process analysis, like you said, and getting all of that knowledge out that needs to be baked into all of these agents that never really been talked about. It's because you learn it over time, almost by osmosis, right? So there's hundreds of things that we know as professional documentation people that are not anywhere near in a Confluence or SharePoint repository, and that makes that institutional knowledge gold that needs to be managed and utilized.
So we've got two more questions, and they're kind of they intersect. So I'm going to kind of read both of them, and I think we can answer it in one. So the first question is, with the increasing volume of features from upstream engineering and shrinking documentation teams, what content model balances agility, structure, and quality? And what authoring and management approach is best suited for both human and agent consumption? Docs code, Data XML, or an alternative? And we did touch on that. And then so someone else asked, clarification, please, Docs code, so Markdown versus DITA. You said DITA emphatically, particularly because of pre-processing and knowledge graphs. Can you elaborate? Asking because Docs code, Markdown, static site generators, Docasaurus, Mintify, etc. seems to be all the rage. And I've been watching this with my popcorn over the next while. And, one of the things that struck me, and this is kind of a bit off topic, but not really, is that like schema.org has just kind of deprecated the FAQ schema because it's been gamified. And so now it's what do they call that? Microfacts, and so that will end up getting gamified. So, when we're looking at, how do we make our content robust? What is the good content model and how do we balance that? So we've got like 2 minutes to answer that before the top of the hour.
Yeah, I'll just tell you a 1 minute story. So I worked closely with several people in the documentation space who were doing the most advanced work with knowledge graphs, and they were manually trying to construct them. And I said, you're going to have heart failure. You're talking about millions of nodes that need to be not only created, but maintained. And then we created what was called the document object model graph project, which you can look up, and it's also on my website, where we realized anything with a schema, especially a documentation format with a schema, like DITA, right, or an XML schema, right, if it's just an XML environment, can automatically be used to automatically construct a knowledge graph, because that schema can become what's called the structural ontology, and then all you need to do is transform your content into a format that the DITA Open Toolkit does this already, into a format that the graph can ingest. And so we're able to build an entire knowledge graph of the entire knowledge corpus automatically and maintain it automatically. That would take you incredible numbers of people to build and maintain. Now, why a graph? Because a graph is deterministic. It's not probabilistic. When you shred your content up into vector databases and vector RAG models, it loses the relationship of one topic to another. It loses the links. It loses the metadata. It loses the declarative semantics that this is a danger versus a caution statement, right? It throws everything away. But then when we query a graph to go find or modify, that was content that we either need to deliver to a customer or modify and update, we can pick out exactly the piece of content and only that piece of content that should be delivered to the large language model, to the LLM, which, guess what, costs exponentially less because we're not burning LLM tokens. And so we're not only more accurate that way, we're cheaper by miles. And the LLM makers don't want you to know that, by the way, because they want you to burn tokens, right? They think reasoning is taking one query, getting an answer, and then trying to run another probabilistic query on that one. What they're doing is they're making you burn tokens.
There's also the gamification of this, where I understand that at some companies, you're seen as more productive the more tokens you burn. So they find ways to burn tokens so that they get rewarded for it. So this comes down to governance again, right? Like if you incentivize the use of tokens, you're going to get the use of tokens, right?
Yeah.
So
more content, more context, bigger prompts create worse results.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, so I could talk to you for ages, and Harry. Oh, Harry's back. We have to be careful what we say. We're going to do something through Kinetic Information, Kinetic Council, where we do kind of like an extended chat where we can, ask me anything, and we'll just talk about this, and then we'll publish it probably on YouTube. But in the meantime, we have to stop because it is at the top of the hour. So I want to thank you so much. I wish every client, potential client, would watch this before they embark on these projects. So I found it very interesting and very helpful. So I hope our audience did as well. And Harry, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap up the webinar.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Harry.
Helps to definitely be allowed. Sorry about that, guys. No, fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, Michael, your time, and Rahel, your time, fantastic. And again, to the audience who are watching, thank you very much for your questions. Apologies they weren't able to be followed up in entirety, but we obviously will have a follow-up with Kinetic Council. Possibly we could keep these questions as a placeholder to address later on. But yeah, thank you very much. And this will obviously be recorded, so we'll also republish this later on our YouTube channel and on LinkedIn. So you will see the whole thing in its entirety. I found it extremely valuable. I'm trying to pick up my jaw off the floor a little bit here. But yeah, thank you very much both. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope that you have a terrific afternoon. And again, all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry.